You're listening to the official Reformed Stoic podcast, covering politics, philosophy, theology, conspiracy theories. I'm ready to get to the bottom of this life. Are you? Join Wolfgang, Sketty Squad, Purity Gang, as we strive to take dominion over this dying planet. I am Reformed Stoic, and this is my podcast. Diet Coca-Cola. Don't mind if I glug. Quake was such a good game. Woo! Quaking it and shaking it and baking it. Alright, guys. Well. Alrighty. Let's go ahead and get to the home base here. We've been a little bit negative these last few days. What's going on? Somebody forgot something. Okay, hold on. Somebody forgot something. 1 second. Intruder alert! Intruder alert! Alright, that wasn't too bad. Sorry. This is my mom, dude. My mom was here. That's who you guys were hearing. Mic check, mic check. That's who you guys were hearing earlier. Is the microphone quiet? It kind of looks like it's a little quiet. Okay, this is starting off as a mess. Anyway, my mom was here. She was helping me clean up. She does that sometimes. It's very nice. Microphone's turned up all the way. Can I turn it up more over here? Alright, anyway, we're going to look at some droughts today. We're going to look at some stuff about suicide. Well, that was a different microphone. This is the main microphone. It's not going up as loud as I'd want it, though. I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, guys, let's just go ahead and get to the news segment. Yeah, droughts, suicide, and then problem of evil for the religious topic. Let's go. Maybe I'll have to spend some time working on the microphone today. Let's see here. Here's a little gain. How's that doing? Mic check, mic check. There's a little more gain. Let's go. Okay. New segment. You're listening to the Reformed Stoic News segment. Let's go. All right, friendos. Mic check, mic check. I just really need the microphone close more than anything. We should be all right. I'll just try to talk loud. All right, here we go, guys. Let's go ahead and get cracking. Europe faces wildfires and extreme drought amid record heat wave. Oh, no.
And across much of Europe, the continent is in the depths of a heat wave and desperate for rain. Meteorologists there say Europe's conditions could be worse than they've ever been in more than 500 years. CBS's Ian Lee has the details. Ian?
Adriana, Europe is being hit by a double whammy. First, extreme drought is ravaging the continent. And second, heat wave after heat wave is drying it into a tinderbox. A sea of flames washes across a national park in central Portugal. More than 1,500 firefighters battle this blaze, throwing everything they've got at it, but it continues to rage. In France, the fire season has also been relentless, displacing thousands of people.
Our firefighters are tired after 1 month of fighting.
Overwhelmed, the country put out a call for help. Firefighters around Europe answered.
To see that we are not alone and to fight with a very exceptional situation.
While forests burn up, rivers are drying up. Germany's Rhine, a vital artery of industry, keeps coal and gas flowing to power plants, but its levels are falling critically low. Elsewhere, dead fish bake in the hot summer sun as Europe endures its fourth heat wave, with temperatures in some places reaching over 100 degrees. And as the waters recede, the continent's history emerges, from ruins in Spain to this World War II bomb discovered in northern Italy.
Well, I believe that the droughts and it's like the climate change is really happening, but it's not really because of carbon emissions. It's because of God. I think that we're witnessing some of God's wrath. It's hard to tell sometimes. Christians get a reputation for saying everything's always the end. But this is a fascinating time that we're living in, my friends. Yeah, that's part of why I covered this subject today. We're covering droughts in Europe and in the United States. And then somebody mentioned something about mega floods going to California, so we got a section on that as well. It's very peculiar.
Pulled from a riverbed and safely detonated. Even England's mighty River Thames has evaporated at its source.
It's completely dried up all the way. The odd puddle, the odd muddy bit, no flow anywhere so far.
Parts of the UK recently introduced water restrictions, but the lack of rain has British farmers fearing their livestock might run out of food.
I've lived here all my life. I'm 24 and I've never seen it so dry. And it makes me worry that if I'm still here in 20, 30, 40 years' time, what the farm's going to look like then.
The UK is experiencing its worst drought in nearly 50 years. Take this field in London. It should be filled with green grass. Instead, it's dry, dusty, and dead. Adriana?
Yeah, it's an important point, and it's a point that's maybe less convincing than my other points, but it's important nonetheless. They tell us that there's this science of greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. We've all been very familiar with it ever since, what was it? It was around 2003, An Inconvenient Truth, the documentary from Al Gore on global warming. I think that documentary was making predictions, if I do remember correctly, for 2019. Like California was going to be underwater in 2019. But the point is that it's not really carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. It's just God. God just decides the weather. It sounds a little bit oversimplified. Maybe it doesn't sound scientific enough, but God controls the weather. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It doesn't have to be complicated to be true. It just is what it is. Okay. Cutting down the Amazon for farming may have something to do with the world's worst weather. My Amazon. Well, you know what, dude? They probably shouldn't have cut down the Amazon, honestly. That's what I've been saying before. It's like, I do care about the environment. It's less about the carbon emission science and the cow farts and more just like, hey, let's not have fish having their heads stuck in Coca-Cola plastic things, and let's not have trash in the water, and, let's not burn down the rainforest. That's the OG. That's the OG environment stuff. I care about the environment and shit. It doesn't help that cutting down most of the trees on the planet destroys the soil. The soil gets taken by the wind, and then there's no way for it to hold water. Interesting perspective there. Fast-track forest thinning activity in the West began in 2010, and the cataclysmic catastrophe activity across the globe gradually progresses. As human beings, we tell ourselves that we have everything, and now we can't manage this problem. We made different things, and we invent many things. This is showing us how poor we are, how even we can't save ourselves. We should know our ability before we do anything else. Nothing is good if we're not making ourselves good. People don't have complete control, you guys. That's the thing. Weather is out of our control. Weather is out of our control. It's just something that happens, that's bad, that makes our lives harder. That's this idea that we can completely eliminate natural catastrophes with science is naive. Let's keep it rocking. So now we got gravitas. Europe faces worst drought in 500 years. Holy crap.
Our final story is about climate change. Scientists have tried explaining it for years. They've given lectures, they've published papers, but none of it has really moved our world leaders. Maybe pictures will. Take a look at the first set. It may look like a desert, but it's not. What you're looking at is a reservoir in Spain. 84.
Yeah, there could be some sort of advanced beam weaponry that we use, like the heart machine that does something. I don't know all the details of it, but yeah, we could probably do a little bit of this and that with the weather.
4% empty. You can see the paddle boats and water slides abandoned nearby. Aquatic life driven to death. The reason? Climate change. Spain had its hottest July since 1961. Some parts of the Iberian Peninsula are at their driest in 1200 years. Let that sink in. 1200 years. Now for the next set of pictures. What you're looking at is Italy's longest river, River Po. Large sandbanks have started appearing around it. Why? Again, climate change. This region is facing its worst drought in 70 years. As the river pulled back, it revealed some ghosts of the past, like this one, a bomb from World War II. The device was found by fishermen in the region. They called in the army, which carried out a controlled explosion. Now we go to France. See those beautiful sand plains? What if I told you those are not plains? What you're looking at is a dried up river. Not a single drop of water remains. All the tourist boats have been beached as a result. The restaurants nearby have nearly shut. The reason? Our next set of pictures will give you an idea. Wildfires are raging across southwestern France. Nearly 6,000 hectares of forests have been burnt. This blaze follows 2 wildfires in the month of July. Put together, they scorched more than 20,000 hectares. What do these pictures tell you? A crisis of biblical proportions. You've seen the pictures, now let me show you the data. 63% of land in Britain and Europe is facing drought, 63%. That's almost the size of India. 46% of the land is under warning, 17% under a state of alert. As a result, Europe's rivers are drying, the reservoirs barely have any water left. And the situation is the same across the continent next 4 days. Temperatures are so high, it could trigger fires. In France,
the government has declared Amber Alert. Wait, what? Isn't that the thing that goes off when a kid gets kidnapped? All right. It must mean something else, too. Or maybe she didn't say Amber Alert.
They already have. It was their driest July since records began in 1959. 3 countries breached 40 degrees Celsius last month, Spain, France, and the UK. Now remember, we're talking...
Come on. Oh, are we going to survive, dude? If this fucking survives, it's going to be so epic. Did we seriously survive? Holy shit. No, we survived, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we survived, bro. Wow. Holy crap. I'm not going to explain to you what I just did, but yeah, we're really lucky that the stream kept going. It's such a pain in the ass to have to do a part 2, dude. Such a pain in the ass to have to do a part 2. Okay, that should be better. Holy shit, we're really lucky that that worked. Okay. Sorry, guys.
No other events similar to the drought of 2018. But this year, I think it is really worse than the 2018.
This drought has serious economic consequences. You see, rivers in Europe are not just vital ecosystems, they're transport routes. They carry around 1 ton of freight per citizen every year. Total value more than $80 billion, 80. But right now, those rivers look like this. Those are the mighty rivers of Europe, now reduced to dried sand beds. Without their water, Europe cannot grow food, it cannot transport cargo, it cannot even generate electricity. Western Europe's hydropower output was down 20% in the second quarter of this year. How is Europe planning to tackle this crisis? Each government has announced its own measures. France, for instance, has set up a crisis team. Their main priority is ensuring drinking water. Reports say 100 French municipalities are short of drinking water. Italy has declared a drought emergency. Water rationing has been announced in cities like Verona and Pisa. Rice production has been hit. Farmers are unable to produce enough rice for the famous Italian risotto. The Netherlands has declared a nationwide water shortage. People have been asked to take quicker showers, also not to wash their cars or water their gardens.
Oh, yeah, I heard something about that. There was like a huge fine for taking a shower or something. Yeah, dude. So there really is a serious drought situation. Now it's all coming together. I remember hearing somebody say something about the shower fine.
In Germany, all the focus is on the Rhine. It is the financial heartbeat of Germany. You see, the Rhine requires a basic water level to support shipping. If it falls below that, ships cannot pass. Germany says it is days away from falling below that level. Freight ships are already sailing at 25% capacity. If this is not an emergency, I don't know what is. The pictures, the data, the testimonies, all of them hint at a climate emergency in Europe. It is not some distant threat anymore. It is very much here. And as we prepare to enter the winter season, more questions remain. Yes, the heat will disappear, but what climatic shock will winter behold? WION is now available.
Wow. So we take a look at circumstance right now, and it's interesting how I've seen this. It also happened in my life. Like, I moved to Vegas the same time this political climate was heating up, and I also didn't have friends and stuff, and that was in my personal life. Now it's like we just had a pandemic, and there's also a war starting, and now there's also these climate problems. Everything's kind of just lining up for the perfect storm. And yeah, man, the more I squint at these times, the more I just think this is God's work. This is not just happens, chance, circumstance. Things are happening, baby. It really is frustrating when things go wrong on the stream. So far, my mother forgot her phone, and then the internet, but I know how to avoid that internet problem in the future. I'm glad that I was able to save it, you know, even when shit goes to crap. It's not a very sophisticated sentence. It's nice when we can keep everything in the same VOD. All right, let's keep rocking. Here in Germany, we had one thunderstorm with 5 minutes of rain, and then the thunder continued without rain. Just lightnings without rain. It didn't really rain for months now. In India, in my city, we have several lakes and streams built by local rulers centuries ago for drinking and irrigation. But as a child, all I saw was dried up, polluted lakes used as garbage disposals. From 2013, we saw some NGOs, along with people, started cleaning up the lakes and beautifying it, and the government, too, stepped up to clean the lakes and rivers. Now, even in summers, the lakes don't dry up. People do fishing in it, and we get some good parks and sceneries. That's a happy story. In Nigeria, we had a similar issue with Lake Chad Lake, which water level had almost dried up, and it is threatening the lives of the natives that lives around the Lake Chad, including the cattle and farming or agricultural activities. Lake Chad is shared by 4 states in the West African sub-region that is Niger Republic, Cameroon, and the Republic of Chad. That's so many that's so many funny things back to back, dude. Like, Niger kind of looks like the N-word. The West African sub-region that is Nigeria, Niger Republic, Cameroon, it kind of sounds like when people call EBZ Cameroonian, and the Republic of Chad. Like, that's just a lot of meme stuff. The Niger Republic, Cameroon, and the Republic of Chad. Awesome. Till date of drying up, Lake Chad remains a major problem with the sustainability of human lives within the concerned states and the government. Yeah, so basically we're seeing some drought issues in Europe, and that's bad, and this is bad times for droughts. Drought declared across 8 areas of England. Okay. So I guess we're going pretty deep on this from a few sources. After this, we got drought takes toll on Northern California rice fields. And then, what to know, potential mega flood in California. So let's get the finishing touches on Europe.
The Gloucestershire countryside near Cirencester. This summer, the Cotswolds are a pale and arid land. This, one of 8 areas declared to be suffering an official drought, announced by ministers after a meeting with the Environment Agency, water companies and farmers. The drought could last until October and possibly into next year.
It's important in the latter part of this summer that we show some restraint, because while we're likely to get those usual winter rains that will replenish stocks in our reservoirs, there is a risk that we'll have a dry winter following a dry summer. That's why we must act early and in advance of that problem.
So what happens when an official drought is declared? It means water companies, if they haven't already, are likely to introduce hosepipe bans and possibly car washing and paddling pool bans too. They can take more water than usual from rivers, reservoirs and aquifers. And they can shift water, pumping it from one area to another.
We would normally be stood. I mean, you'd probably be easily knee-deep in a kind of little slightly muddy pond. So we should all be stood in water right now.
Alistair Knowles from the Rivers Trust has taken us to see where the River Thames officially starts at Kemble in Gloucestershire, except the source of the river has evaporated.
I don't want to be that guy that's sort of running around with his hair on fire on the news, but this is the new normal. I think there's a bit of rain forecast coming maybe in parts of the country next week, but you're going to take a lot of well above average rain to replenish the stocks beneath our feet, fall into the catchment that runs right down the Thames from this very dry source all the way down into London and out to the estuary.
Second only to the Severn in length, the Thames is now a river in retreat.
We were told we'd find the new source of the Thames here, 5 miles downstream, but as you can see, there's no river and there's no fish. With every day, the Thames is shrinking.
Coming much further, kilometres down the river, to stand where we should be able to go for a little bit of a bimble and put a kayak in or a canoe. Personally, I think this is pretty shocking. And when we talk about abstraction and taking water out of our river system, which we now be doing with under drought conditions, you've got to ask yourself how much water is there left to take from.
If the rivers are low, so are the reservoirs. This is Ardingly Reservoir, owned by South East Water, serving Sussex and Kent. From today, it's enforcing a hosepipe and sprinkler ban. Some experts say we wouldn't need restrictions if the government had prepared for potential drought much earlier.
What we don't have is a real plan moving forward for the next 5-10 years so that we can become more resilient to these types of droughts, because we're clearly not ready and we don't have the supplies that we need to stop us all having water restrictions.
Dude, what's happening to the world, you guys? Doesn't it just kind of seem like things have been in decline ever since maybe 2012? I mean, really, things have been in decline for a lot longer than that, but people were wondering whether or not the world was going to end. You know, there's that whole Mayan calendar thing in 2012, and well, it kind of seems like ever since then things have just, it started with the radical political shift where just everybody's at each other's throats, and systems seem to embrace the radical left, and you know, if you're a Republican, you're tarred and feathered, and I just feel like I'm losing clarity, you guys. I just feel like it's been rough for a long time, and you have to try to artificially create an environment that sustains comfort. There's a fog that's closing in. Just so many things have been crazy for so long. It's going to be harder to speak clearly and to articulate your thoughts and to make positive things happen. And you got to protect yourselves, guys. You got to build up your shields because things have been nasty, man, on a lot of different levels.
Restrictions.
It might not officially be a drought in Yorkshire, but the bone-dry conditions are a fire risk. This was a wildfire near Holmes in Cleveland. Firefighters tackling a blaze in a field in County Durham spotted this whirlwind-like phenomenon. Called dust devils, they're usually only seen in deserts. Rare sights and real risks. This evening, fires broken out on Studland Heath near Poole in Dorset. Another vivid warning of the danger that comes with drought.
Well, Europe is also battling record temperatures, and experts have warned it could be in the midst of its worst drought for 500 years, with no sign of significant rainfall to come. Wildfires have been spreading fast in the hot, dry conditions, and hundreds of firefighters from across the continent have been arriving in France to tackle a series of fires in the southwest. Simeon Brown reports.
This is the view of a European crisis from the largest protected area in Portugal. July was the country's hottest on record, and that continuous heat has fed today's flames. Portugal's wildfires have devoured 37,000 acres of land, including large swathes of Portugal's Serra da Estrela National Park. This is Manuel Pina's home.
Evacuar os pais para a aldeia e vir a vigiar a casa. Quando chegou aqui havia meios? Sim, meios houve sempre, muitos meios aqui no terreno.
For 7 days this fire has burned from door to door, but these firefighters have fought back.
Da nossa parte, salvaram-nos a casa, o pavilhão. Foi uma ajuda preciosa.
A small victory in a battle against extreme weather that Europe is losing. Here in southwestern France was an international effort to push back the wildfires from successive heat waves. French firefighters, fatigued from a blaze that has lasted a month, were relieved by officers from Germany, Romania and Greece.
It doesn't matter the country, we are firefighters and we have to help people from around the world.
Europe's heat wave has caused severe droughts. In Burgundy, it has taken the fish out of water and turned the riverbed into an open grill. Meanwhile, Italy's longest river, the Po, now looks more road than stream. This part of Europe has been especially vulnerable to intensifying weather.
Both the northern coastline of the Mediterranean and the southern coastline are likely to see more intense summers with more frequent and more intense heat waves and also more droughts.
What is the impact of these heat waves that we're seeing across Europe?
The impacts are enormous, actually. So the food that we eat, agriculture is enormously impacted. Transport, the roads aren't built for the temperatures that we're seeing at the moment. There's a lot of river transport that goes on across Europe, and much of that transport either can't be done or the weights that are on those boats are much reduced because the water levels are so much lower.
Europe is getting warmer faster than the global average, and this is the outcome. Rivers drying, boats grounded, and flames flourishing.
Simeon Brown there. Well, earlier I spoke to Group Managing Officer David Diggins from the Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service, and I asked him first what the fire service had been dealing with in the last few days.
Here in Derbyshire, we've been receiving unprecedented call volumes over the last few days. Our Joint Fire Control, which is shared with Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service, on average receives around 109 calls per day per county. What we've seen over the last 2 days on the 19th of July is over 1,000% increase in that, and yesterday 500% increase. And we're expecting to see very similar levels again today as the incidents go on into the evening.
The increase in calls is absolutely incredible. What are people reporting? What are the incidents you're having to deal with?
So we're still dealing with a wide variety of incidents. involving road traffic collisions, water rescue incidents, and as you can imagine, fires in the open throughout the county. As the fuel on the ground is tinder dry, we can see grass and field fires spread really quickly into properties, which our firefighters are trying to tackle to limit that damage to property, effectively saving lives.
Are you worried that if this goes on much longer, you will struggle to properly deal with these things, to be able to reach everything that you want to?
The contingency plans that we've had in place for a while and which we practice upon are coming to fruition now, and we're seeing evidence that the plans that we've got in place are working, and we can deal with an increase in this call type. What's really important is the support of the public in assisting us in reducing these fires. But we are comfortable at the moment, and we'd just like to urge members of the public, particularly around bonfires, smoking materials. These can spread so quickly and cause lasting damage to the environment, and these will really assist us in limiting fires. I think we've also got to consider, with the warmer weather as well, water rescue incidents are generally on the increase nationally at this time of year. If we can urge all the members of the public that maybe do go open water swimming to consider, is it needed at this time of the year? Water levels are much lower, and subsurface hazards are different to what the usual levels might be. So we'd really ask the public to support us in that.
Yeah, on that issue about the public, some supermarkets have stopped selling disposable barbecues because of the fire risk. And there are plenty of people saying this is completely over the top, it's just a bit of heat. What would you say to those people?
The supermarket support for stop selling of barbecues is fantastic news for us. We've seen, and members of the public in our open spaces, particularly in the west area of Derbyshire, in our Peak District, see the devastation that these fires can cause. So we're delighted to see the support from those supermarkets involved. We understand that it is summer and people do want to enjoy themselves, and I think a cooler box with a sandwich inside is much nicer this time of year than a hot beef burger in a field, and we'd definitely urge members of the public to support that. Don't take barbecues into open spaces or even in their own garden, along with controlled burns of rubbish in gardens can also have a devastating effect as well.
Group Manager David Diggins, thanks very much for talking to us today.
Pleasure.
An artificial drought. That's an interesting thing to try to comprehend. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, but so people have displayed the ability to produce rain clouds on command, huh? I'll have to look more into that. The water companies are a joke. The waterman on my land, asbestos cement, broke regularly. Eventually, nearly a dozen times in a week, we would look out the window and see small geyser of water coming out of the ground, running down our meadow to the stream. Before the main could be replaced, there were around a dozen site visits by women in reflective jackets. This guy sounds nuts. Manager this, manager that. I don't even really know what this guy's talking about, dude. All right. Water bill will become more expensive very soon, on par with oil and gas. Less supply and more demand. Great news for water companies, who will gain tremendous profit from the water shortages. Yeah, it seems like everything's amounting to good news for the companies. Pandemic's good news for the people distributing the vaccines. The mom and pop businesses had trouble. Small businesses had trouble surviving. The chains are just going to survive indefinitely. It just feels like everything's just kind of strangling the small business. The small guy, the little guy. Little guy's getting strangled, and I don't like it. Can we be good to the little guy? It will if the water companies keep squandering the masses of rain that falls on these small islands. Same was happened in 2021. Monsoon failure and midsummer, autumn, winter, even spring was elevated, and drought early Kharif season was experienced. Drought was compensated by the Zulial War. Who the hell are these people, dude? All right, moving on. Droughts everywhere, baby, and now it's coming to the United States. So all of these presentations are from the last few days. Now we got drought takes toll on Northern California rice fields. Drought marathon, baby.
Right, as California continues to reel from the depths of this historic drought, farmers are facing an uncertain future. That's especially the case in the rice fields of the Sacramento Valley. And that's where NBC Bay Area's Joe Rosado Jr. takes us to see the impact.
In the small farm town of Williams, an hour north of Sacramento, time is set to the rice fields.
Virtually all the high-quality sushi rice grown in the United States is grown right here.
In a normal year, 100,000 acres of Colusa County will bear rice. With water so precious, they even name streets after it.
It has never been this dry here.
But for third-generation farmer Donald Bransford, this year there is no water and there is no rice.
I've been farming since 1980, and I've had a rice crop every year except for this year.
Fields that should be green with young rice stalks are down to the dirt.
This is how dry it is. Dirt dry, dusty dry.
The only work underway is a battle against weeds. Like most rice farmers here in West Sacramento Valley, this year Bransford allowed his fields to go fallow.
We typically service about 100,000 acres of rice, and this year there is 1,000 acres planted.
For farmers like Bransford who depend on state and federal irrigation water, it's a game of percentages. In a normal year of rain, he gets 100% of his water allocation. In a bad year, he'll get 75%. But this year, things are so dire, he only got 14% of his water.
And we are in new history.
In rice country, bad news trickles down. There's no work for laborers. Silos only hold the remains of last year's harvest. Mills sit mostly silent. Then, in the middle of all this emptiness, what seems like a mirage. It's a rice field belonging to Bransford's neighbor, one of the very few fields here fed with groundwater, which Bransford and most others don't have.
This is a few hundred acres here. There's over 200 to 250,000 acres that are fallow because of this drought.
But in this small island of lush, an indication of the drought's other casualties.
There are shorebirds, there are egrets. That's a mallard someplace.
Michael Lyons, Director of Public Policy for Audubon, California, says the rice fields are crucial for the survival of millions of migrating birds.
They're so reliant on those rice fields. And now what we're looking at with the drought is significantly reduced amounts of rice planted and even a lower ability.
What about soy? Plant some soy.
To put water out on the landscape.
The fallowed fields are expected to cost the west side of the Sacramento Valley $1.3 billion in income and more than 14,000 jobs.
It's a very sad situation.
It's uncharted territory for Bransford, who worries about the long game of climate change.
We have less rainfall. We have winds now in the Sac Valley, north winds that we have never experienced.
But with Mother Nature in charge, the only thing a farmer can do is look ahead.
We never planned for a year like this.
Joe Rosado Jr.
Wait for a better time.
And
yeah, man, and then you combine that with Lake Mead in Las Vegas. It's like a mega drought. It's like a mega drought, guys, and I don't really understand how it could be done artificially. I mean, I know, yeah, there's the heart machine, and it sounds like Rick was saying they were mastering monsoon creation in Vietnam. Scary to think about, guys. Everybody needs water. I love me some rice. I'm glad years ago my family got out of farming, canning tomatoes in the nearby community of Woodland, California. It was sad at the time, but now it seems like it was a blessing in disguise. And I've just recently started to take an interest in agriculture, guys. Food, creating food, making sure people can eat. If you want to do something important in the world, working in food, man, you know, whether you're working at a restaurant, you're a cook, you're a chef, you're a food icon. I was just watching Food Icons the other day. Some black dude who like makes $2 burgers on the side of the street in Harlem. I was like, you know what, dude? A $2 burger in 2022 made by some community figure in Harlem who just has like tasty drinks and burgers. And that's what it's all about, dude. Coziness, food, culture. But when you're actually working on the farm, and we've been hearing all kinds of horrible stuff about farms lately, like farmers being told to kill off all their cows and food supplies being attacked. We just want everybody to eat, baby. Hell, that's part of what made America great. This place was founded on the cheeseburger. McDonald's, man. Try to keep it positive, you guys. It's not very deep to say, but I think if you can be one of the positive people right now, trying to lift people up rather than trying to drag people down, that's what the world can use, baby. We got to have some faith. We got to have some faith. I don't want to project that, like, I don't want to think that lots of people are going to start dying and we're going to all starve and droughts and mega floods, and let's all get together and sing Kumbaya. Birds were migrating successfully long before there was rice being grown in California. Okay. You're telling me they emptied Lake Mead so they can farm rice in the desert in California? Ridiculous. All right, let's take a look at the mega flood.
Well, certainly a lot of people are talking about it, that research that came out showing the potential for mega floods and our California arc storm events can be more powerful and more impactful heading into the future due to climate change. First, let's talk about what a mega flood event looks like and that arc storm event going back to December 1861 to 1862 in the following year. You had multiple atmospheric river storms impacting California, the ground becoming more saturated, leading to tremendous catastrophic flooding. Much of interior Northern California looking a bit more like a lake with widespread flooding in the Bay Area. Now, imagine if that same pattern was transported to the current year or the next 25 years in a warming climate. So that's what the research, the Arc Storm 2.0 project was looking at, the historical context of what we can see in a high impact event versus one now in a climate change present and future. We have an increase in atmospheric moisture, which powers up higher rain rates and higher snow levels. So for the Sierra, the report found that there could be a 200 to 400% increase in Sierra runoff in that warmer climate. So future arc storms or mega flood events will likely have a much larger impact across California versus what we saw in 1862. So for the Bay Area, I think we've been kind of living through some of these changes with the more frequent droughts, drier and hotter spring to fall periods. We've been noticing the longer fire seasons. But at the same time, even with persistent drought, high impact, fewer storms that do include some very strong atmospheric rivers at times. And we saw a good example of this. Just go back to last October. This was a storm that set a record for atmospheric water vapor. Precipitable water content values over San Francisco were a record high for an October storm. It was the strongest atmospheric river storm we'd seen since January of 2017. And this one storm brought in almost 8% of the state's water budget in the span of about 3 days' time. And for the North Bay, Marin County picking up almost a foot of rainfall, which did help to recharge a lot of reservoirs in that area. But can you imagine if this storm had arrived, not in October, but let's say December and January with saturated soils, we would have seen a lot more widespread flooding than we saw last October. So this does play into the climate change scenario of more frequent droughts, fewer, but potentially more intense atmospheric river storms, where the risk of runoff flooding is higher. And you can see the trend here with the drought monitor last 10 years. Droughts becoming more persistent as those climate change models were suggesting would happen, ongoing across California with increasing drought frequency and intensity. And notice the precipitation whiplash we saw last year. For places like Sacramento, it was the record driest stretch of 212 days without measurable rain. And then within just 1 week, you had a record for 24-hour rainfall occurring with that October storm. So that does play into this concept of drier spring, summer, and fall, but these fewer but higher impact storms in that warming climate that have access to more moisture and the potential for more flooding, something we could likely see in our lifetime playing out within just the last year and what we'll likely see more of moving forward into the future.
Wow, guys. Well, that's about the end of this segment. I like how they talk about a big flood, but the politicians keep approving housing developments and risky floodplains. I saw in an article that you need at least 30 inches of rain for the next 40 years for California to be considered normal. The only thing that will happen is that there's going to be a lot of flash floods because of all the fires and dry soil up in the hills and mountains, but that's because of what's going on right now. California, especially Southern California, needs so much rain for many decades to be back to normal. For God's sake, our ponds are drying up over here, literally drying. Let's pray for rain and for water. And, you know, guys, people got a lot of problems. People got a lot of problems without the planet having these kind of problems. I don't like the idea of food shortages. I don't like the idea of starving to death or freaking running out of water. It's dark. It's dark is what it is. Speaking of dark, we got our next topic coming up. Suicide. Now, why suicide? Well, I figure our country was probably already struggling with suicide, and now we're living in these kind of sketched out times. Pandemic, war, tensions are high, stress is high. So I figured we'd just kind of see what the suicide rates are looking like these days. We got celebs who committed suicide in 2022 so far. Let's start with the beautiful famous people.
Welcome to Past Us. Today we'll talk about top celebrities who committed suicide. Whether it's a Hollywood celeb or another famous figure, this list of famous suicides goes to show that fame doesn't always buy happiness. Plenty of rich and famous stars struggle with mental health among other hardships. To put things into perspective, just check out this complete list of the most famous celebrities who committed suicide. Here's the list of the top celebrities committing suicide. But before starting the video, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe to never miss out on any of our videos. Chelsea Christ, Miss USA. Chelsea Corinne Christ was born in Michigan, United States. By profession, she was an American television presenter, model, and beauty pageant title holder who was crowned Miss USA 2019. She represented the United States in the Miss Universe 2019 pageant and finished in the top 10. She was also nominated for 2 Daytime Emmy Awards. She completed her education at Northwestern High School, Fort Mill High School, and then she enrolled at the University of South Carolina. She was also the founder of the fashion blog White Collar Glam, dedicated to helping women dress professionally in white-collar jobs. In October 2019, she became the New York correspondent for Extra, after serving as a special correspondent in September 2019. She died on January 30th, 2022, after falling from her 60-story high building in Midtown Manhattan in New York City. She wrote in a post, "I hope this day brings you comfort and peace." She asserted that she wanted to leave everything for her mother, who was her contender for the title.
Damn.
She had alleged.
But to say like 60th story, that's intense, dude. Is that one of the most peaceful ways to go? Like, that sure would be an intense, like, final 10 seconds or whatever. I don't want to make jokes about it, but it's grim, man. You know, I don't want to get into personal stuff here, but I always kind of felt like I'm a fighter. I like being alive. I like being in it. And, you know, people paid attention. People who were paying attention. My mind slipped to a couple of dark places these last few days, just when things get hard. And, yeah, you start thinking about it. Like, holy crap, it's an incredibly dark subject, but it's like, how would you want to go if you go? And, you know, jumping off of a building, really high level, where you're guaranteed to just kind of go kersplat on the bottom. I guess that's kind of, maybe not one of the worst options. I am afraid of heights, so that ain't happening for me, dude. Anyway, yeah, she's a supermodel or whatever. She's a Miss America, so keep that in mind, ladies. Keep that in mind, people. There's people who might seem like they got a lot going on, who just, something's going on behind the scenes, and they don't want to be in the game anymore.
Allegedly left a suicide note, leaving her belongings to her mother, and the death note did not confirm that any motive for suicide has been found so far. Number 3. Zoe Sozo Bethel, Miss Alabama. Zoe Sozo Bethel, popularly known as Zoe Bethel, was an American model, Miss Alabama, and a journalist. She was crowned Miss Alabama for America Strong in 2021. She has been working as a journalist for a few years now and rose to fame when she spoke against the former President Trump. As a working model, Bethel was released by her modeling agency for her words, and since then she thought to rise for her vice and spread awareness. She is the voice of many people in any situation, as she constantly speaks against social issues such as abortion. Zoe Sozo Bethel had a horrific accident on February 10th. A police investigation into the death of Miss Alabama 2021, Zoe Sozo Bethel, revealed that the beauty queen reportedly fell out of a third-floor window in Miami. The Miami Police Department responded to a possible suicide attempt around midnight on February 11th, and later confirmed that the 27-year-old model was rushed to the hospital in critical condition by Miami Fire Rescue. She was in a coma for over a week before she succumbed to traumatic brain injuries. On February 18, 2022, at approximately 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time in Miami, our beloved Zoe Sozo Bethel passed away from this life into the next as a result of succumbing to her injuries. Number 2. Hudson Madsen, Michael Madsen's son. Hudson Madsen was a famous military officer, army personnel, celebrity child, media face, and internet star. His age is 26 years old. His father's name is Michael Madsen, and his mother's name is Deanna Madsen. His wife's name is Carly Madsen. As per information, he died on January 23, 2022. Reportedly, he attempted suicide and killed himself. The 26-year-old died from self-inflicted gunshot wounds on the island of Oahu. Michael Madsen said, "I am in shock as my son, whom I just spoke with a few days ago, said he was happy. My last text from him was, 'I love you, Dad.' I didn't see any signs of depression. It's so tragic and sad. I'm just trying to make sense of everything and understand what happened." Number 1. Ian Alexander Jr., Regina King's son. Ian Alexander Jr., son of actor and director Regina King and her ex-husband, music producer Ian Alexander, has died by suicide according to a report by People. He was an up-and-coming DJ and musician who worked under the handle Des Dune, a gourmet chef and King's only child. Alexander Jr. took his own life by hanging himself on January 21st, 2022, his 26th birthday, just days before launching his music career. The Oscar-winning actress, 51, confirmed her only child's death in a statement on Friday, in which she branded Ian a bright light who cared so deeply about the happiness of others. The statement read, "Our family is devastated at the deepest level by the loss of Ian. He is such a bright light who cared so deeply about the happiness of others. Our family asks for respectful consideration during this private time."
Seems pretty random. Seems like a pretty random selection of people. Let's take a look at the comments. As someone who gets depressed, I feel for them. RIP. People always calling them cowards. It's their life. Human nature is self-preservation. It's more than just a little mishap or inconvenience that causes this. Usually these people think extremely hard about this. I know because my time is coming soon. You know, I was in a thread last night on 4chan, and there was a guy who said that he caught his wife cheating on him. And basically, if he was to leave her, he thought that he would be homeless, and he said that he's thinking about killing himself. A lot of people in the thread were trying to convince him not to. You see that a lot in 4chan, people talking about how they're going to kill themselves. It's dark shit, guys. You know, I just want you guys to know about me. I'm the kind of guy who it's like, you know, I complain sometimes, and life a lot of times feels like it's not going my way, but I like being alive. I like being here. I like just seeing how things unfold, and my advice as always is just try to stay cozy, you know? Keep the food around that you like to eat. You got to enjoy what you can enjoy, man. You know, you're not going to be able to control situations with like women or employment or your status, and just do the things you gotta do and just eat some good food, watch some cozy shit, hang out with the boyos. I'm trying to create a cozy environment here. We're doing these 5 days a week, guys. I really just want this to be like something that's not overthought. Get some topics every day, have people hanging out. I think of it as just kind of like a show that you watch, you know? Like when I got home from school, I'd turn on like MTV or something. Just something that's on, you know? Some podcasts will be better than others, but yeah, I recommend you stay in the game, guys. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. When you get Jesus Christ on your side, try to get God on your side, it's not going to make things... There's no guarantees. There's no guarantees that you're going to see Easy Street anytime soon, but you just got to keep going, guys. It's very surprising the people who end up killing themselves. yeah, a lot of people out there who it seems like their lives are good, but they're just not feeling good. And you guys can always reach out to me if you need to. I'm there for you. I got people in my Instagram telling me a little bit about what's going on in their personal life. And I'm not really somebody to judge anybody, guys. So if you need somebody to talk to, I'm there for you. Wyoming's effort to curb its skyrocketing suicide rate. So let's take a look at what's happening in Wyoming. This is about a month old.
It is dark and sometimes invisible. This epidemic of suicide is a major public health concern and is among the leading causes of death in the United States. And now a new lifeline is on the horizon. 988 is a number designated as a new 3-digit dialing code to connect anyone in need of a counselor. That service is expected to launch in just a few days, but how will it be implemented and will people be receptive? ABC's Trevor Ault takes us to the windswept plains of Wyoming, where people are hopeful this new service will save lives.
I've never been angry at my son. I've always been angry at me.
The seconds pass inevitably. This year, Lyle Nyberger should be 33. Instead, he stays 17, forever frozen in the memory of his father, Lance.
As you get into it and talk to other people, all of them say, we're in a life we never wanted to have. We're all in the cowboy up attitude. You know, real men don't cry. Real men don't have problems.
Was that something that you subscribe to?
You know, it's inbred into me. We all have problems. We all have something go wrong, and we all need help at times. And when you learn that you don't need help and you just go on, maybe that makes life a lot tougher.
They say in Wyoming there's 2 seasons, winter and wind. Sometimes bitter and biting, others just a whisper. But when you're here, you feel it. And these days, the same can be said about suicide. In a region known morbidly as the Suicide Belt, Wyoming has the highest rate in America. Its impact so widespread, it feels as present as the wind.
Okay, and I'm Lance Nyberger. I'm the chair of the task force, and again, thank you for being here.
The Natrona County Suicide Prevention Task Force is well aware of the problem. They meet once a month in Casper to plan events, pool resources, and keep track of the lives lost. Top of mind today, another first responder has died by suicide.
Well, 2 days ago, we had our 6th for the year, and it was a first responder on duty. That's a big number in a year to have that happen.
And there's a number of factors putting Wyoming at high risk. Many residents are isolated. And with more guns per capita than anywhere else in America, residents have more access to lethal firearms than mental health professionals. One University of Utah study posits the altitude could be a factor. According to a Gallup poll, the Mountain West is home to some of the happiest Americans, and yet it consistently has higher rates of depression and suicide.
Year to date last year, my officers had responded to 256 persons who were considering suicide. And this year, we have seen an absolute negligible change. And so year to date from May 15th, 253.
Here in Casper, Wyoming's second largest city, police respond to suicide calls twice as often as they do for shoplifting. 16 years ago, one of those calls came from Lance when he found Lyle at home. Lance had no idea his son was suicidal. No note was left behind.
How often do you think about Lyle?
Daily. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about him. Now, after his death, you know, it was horrible. And I came to a point where I realized that it was Lyle's decision and his decision only.
In this area, this is a widespread problem. Why do you think that is?
There's a lot of things going on. One of them is Wyoming's a rural state.
By landmass, Wyoming is the 10th largest state in the country. By population, it's the smallest, meaning even if you wanted help, help might be a long way from you.
This is what you see in most of Wyoming. You'll hit a major town about every 100 miles. And when I say major town, I mean a town of 5,000 people. You might get a call from somebody that's, 100 miles away from the nearest town. But you might also just not have mental health professionals. Wyoming has been a mental health shortage area, always.
Now, federal legislation to help any American in crisis reach a counselor by phone is set to launch July 16th. But in this state, even that will be an uphill climb to adopt.
I'm familiar with 911. What's 988?
So 988 will be the new 3-digit number for the suicide lifeline.
What does that mean specifically for Wyoming?
You're not going to find a cell tower every 50 miles or so here. And so making sure that we are meeting those infrastructure challenges is probably going to be our biggest, most expensive long-term project.
988 is being touted as a one-stop shop for anyone experiencing a mental health crisis. But funding the project so that healthcare providers are ready for the influx of calls is proving to be challenging. The Department of Health and Human Services expects the volume of calls to double within the first year. However, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, only 4 states have enacted a concrete plan for funding. The Central Wyoming Counseling Center is one of just 2 suicide hotline centers already up and running in Wyoming. It opened just 2 years ago. The workers there know this state's layout, its culture, its resources or lack thereof, all of which is essential in a crisis.
CWCC Suicide Lifeline, may I help you?
They've secured $2.1 million to expand the suicide hotline into a 24-hour service.
I'm glad you called today.
Most of it federal money from the American Rescue Plan Act that Governor Mark Gordon appropriated. But with the state legislature refusing to expand Medicaid, that federal funding will soon run out.
There's still a lot of work to make sure it's prepared for the rollout.
Absolutely.
Then the funding also runs out
Absolutely.
in 2 years.
Yep, we're going to be very busy the next year.
So what happens if, hypothetically, a person is 150 miles from the nearest crisis center or hospital, and they call because they're in a crisis?
Well, we roll out what we have in the area. Well, which might, if they need that level, if there's an imminent risk of death by suicide and law enforcement presence is needed, then we'll roll them out.
Around Casper, that happens often. As we sit down with Police Chief Keith McFeeters, he tells us his officers are responding to a suicide call as we speak.
The state of Wyoming is very much deeply indoctrinated in what I would describe as the cowboy culture. There's a cowboy code of ethics that really embodies, look, whatever the world can throw at me, I can find my way through this. But suicide and mental health,
and it's probably the same exact way in Alaska, and I just feel like nobody's talking about it here, man. It's interesting. It's like there is kind of a toxic masculinity, but it's not the kind that the left talks about. It's just this buck up and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Look, life just unfolds in a certain way for everybody, and some guys find themselves in a hard place, and it's these social norms, man. Social norms are so toxic. And I tell you that, like, party people are all about social norms. It's all about trying to put on this illusion, like, I'm the best, I'm the highest quality product, I'm the most of a man, I get the most women, I'm the most popular. And I can tell you from personal experience, man, people, wherever you stack up in this party people scene, it just falls apart for so many people, man. People get on drugs, people kill themselves, people go to jail, people end up, their lives fall apart, man. People with a wife and kids end up on the street, leaving their family behind. And, like, you need people in your life who will more or less love you unconditionally. And I do believe that probably your best shot is at a church, man. And I know we're living in this epidemic of guys who just don't have community. You didn't see eye to eye with where everything was headed in the schools and in the masses, and everybody's connected from social media. So many things on the internet are fueling this kind of groupthink, and if you don't vibe with it, then you feel isolated and you feel like you might not be able to reach out to people. It's a shame because on one hand, we talk about I talk about how I ultimately don't really agree with psychology, but you got to know that there's people out there that you can talk to, man. You got to find some people who you can talk to. Maybe it should be easy enough to find a therapist and just go in and be like, hey, I really just want to talk. I'm not looking for anybody to diagnose me with anything. There's got to be options, guys. Mental toughness is going to be a good barrier for you. It's going to be a good filter that, to the best of your ability, keeps you from falling down super, super far. But yeah, it's just sad, guys. We got to look out for ourselves. We got to be good to ourselves. I'd recommend trying to be good to other people, man. There's enough negativity out there. Try to be good to people, baby. Let's lift people up.
Are things that you may not be able to just kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and see your way through.
With this culture, it can be a bit like the fact you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
It's my job then to put water everywhere I can. I can make enough resources available to them that at least they know where to find it.
And many who know the depths of suicide firsthand refuse to treat it as a foregone conclusion.
It's like you living in this negative, I guess, self-made hell.
Jason Wittmeyer attempted suicide some 10 years ago. He now works with Lance on the task force to stop others from doing the same.
I would imagine that there's a bond that you would have with people that know these dark depths.
Yeah, there is. But you don't get that feeling until you know their story. You can't bond if you don't know what they're into.
That's something Lance Nyberger still thinks about when he reflects on the loss of his son.
He didn't feel comfortable enough to come to me and say, Dad, life's kicking my butt. I'm really struggling here. And at the time of his death, when he needed me the most, I wasn't there for him because we were going in opposite directions instead of working together.
The messages that you give to someone who's lost someone close to them, that kindness that you extend to help them deal with that, do you extend the same kindness to yourself?
I've gotten better at it. For about 6 months, I didn't care whether I lived or died. It wasn't until our daughter gave birth about 7, 8 years ago to our granddaughter, I really realized what I would have missed had I not lived back then.
Wyoming has been referred to as just a small town with unusually long streets. And here, everyone seems to know someone who's dealt with suicide. For Lance, there's both horror and strength in that sentiment, that everybody is dealing with something. That pain is a universal burden we carry. But what Lance has learned is with a little effort and an open heart, it's possible to help others lighten the load.
It used to come out quite a bit right after his death. You realize that a sudden death like this, you can just wipe out everything else. He's going to be 17 forever.
Is that what fuels you to keep up with the work?
It is. That's what keeps me going. My faith and the fact that I truly believe I'll see him again someday. I'll be with him, and that's what's given me the hope to continue.
988, a bit of a lasso to try to curb the downside of that cowboy culture. Our thanks to Trevor. If you or someone that you know needs help, remember you are not alone. You can also call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline right now at 800-273-TALK. 988 launches on Saturday.
Yeah, man, something that I've been thinking about these last few days, because, I aired out my drama that I was having on Facebook, and people in that thread talking about me, they seem to understand that I was going through some sort of a hard time, but nobody ever reached out to me back then. It just amounted to, cancel culture. Let's all stand around the fire and say all the worst things that we know about Jake, and it's interesting, man, because, I was going through a hard time, and if I would have been a mentally weaker person or just a different kind of person, that was territory to where it's like, hey, I think some people in my situation might have necked. And it's sad because, yeah, ultimately people failed me. Nobody reached out to me. Nobody really cared. And I feel like something that I can kind of be proud of is that I was left for dead. And I did pull myself up by the bootstraps, man. I stayed alive. I figured out how to stay positive and how to ultimately live without people. And just reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, man, are you all right? I feel like that's something that doesn't exist anymore. Social media is all about just puffing your chest out and trying to look like you're happier than everybody. And if you ever say anything outside of the norms, people are going to unfollow you and cancel you and gossip about you. And it's really negative, man. If you see somebody struggling, if you see somebody on Facebook being cringe, instead of like gossiping about them and trying to spread rumors, maybe send them a message and be like, hey, man, you know, instead of like, just send them a message. Be like, hey, man, you doing all right? Well, reaching out is sending a message. Nothing in my chat is reaching out. That's just my chat, dude. But anyway, I'm not trying to make it about me. Reaching out, just so everybody knows, is message someone privately and be like, hey, man, how you doing? You doing all right? It looks like maybe you're having a rough time. Try to be understanding of what people are going through. A lot of guys out there just feel like the world is against them and nobody likes them and nobody understands them. And that can be the difference. Sending a message just saying, hey, man, you doing all right? All right, let's finish it up with this little article here. U.S. suicide rates are stagnant or rising among many groups despite overall national decline. Modest dips in national suicide rates since 2019 obscure disparities in suicide mortality among non-white, racial ethnic groups, and other vulnerable populations. Between 2000 and 2018, suicide mortality rates rose by 35% in the United States, after reaching a peak of 14.5 deaths per 100,000 people, the highest rate in 50 years. Suicide rates dropped by 2.1% in 2019, but researchers caution that this decline does not tell the full story of suicide mortality in the United States. That's because a closer look at the data reveals that this decrease in suicides is primarily due to a modest decline in suicides among white people, according to an extensive review article by School of Public Health researchers. Published in the April edition of Annual Review of Public Health, the review scrutinized U.S. suicide trends and analyzed the underlying causes of suicide mortality. Based on national data from 2000 to 2019, the review showed that while national suicide rates declined modestly in 2019, suicide rates rose or remained stable among all non-white racial ethnic groups. So apparently white people started to kill themselves less. Maybe they're just fascinated to see what happens with this society. And data remains limited on the suicide risks among other vulnerable populations, such as sexual and gender minorities, incarcerated people, and military members. I see many people in this suicide field discussing this decline as a positive sign, and it is, but we have to be aware that it is specific to one group of people, and many other groups are not experiencing similar declines. This took a very bizarre turn. So apparently white people started to kill themselves less in 2019. But really, the key years to look at would be since 2020. Among all racial ethnic groups, American Indian and Alaskan Native people have the highest reported suicide rates. Okay. Measuring suicide rates is uniquely challenging for a variety of reasons. For example, to know that a death was due to suicide requires some certainty about intent, which is often not easy to confirm. Researchers emphasize that the reported rates are likely an undercount of the true suicide toll for these groups, and that discrepancy in reporting may not be equally distributed across racial and ethnic groups. For example, data shows that black people who die by suicide are less likely than whites to leave a suicide note or document mental health conditions due to poorer access to care. Understanding the underlying causes of suicide among all groups is critical, but also difficult, as it is a complex public health issue influenced by multiple biological and social factors. Focusing on group factors rather than individual factors, The researchers emphasized that structural racism, firearm access, and economic strain are all major detriments of suicide risk, as well as the national opioid epidemic and social isolation. I hope that we continue to see reductions in the suicide rate as new years of data become available. Yeah, well, this didn't age very well because I have a feeling that the suicide rates increased after 2020. It will then be important to understand what is contributing to these decreases so that we can improve prevention, but we must also be vigilant in focusing on the suicide rates in historically marginalized and vulnerable groups specifically. And that's the pattern that we keep seeing in news, is that it's always categorized by race. If these data show anything, it is that it is time to move beyond focusing on one suicide rate for the entire population. Really? I don't know if we did learn that. I think maybe I picked a bad article. Anyway, guys, we are now moving on to the religious topic for today, the problem of evil. And, you know, I like to see when Jay Dyer chimes in on stuff. Jay Dyer is one of my favorite sources lately. He's a pretty smart guy. I find it kind of disturbing when he hashes out why he thinks all Christians who aren't Orthodox are going to burn in hell. I personally think all denominations of Christians are getting saved. Maybe even Mormons, man. Maybe even Mormons. I think Mormons are very misled, but maybe even Mormons. Damn it. I got to go pee. I'm going to go ahead and start this video, and hopefully I'll get back before it gets juicy. So, problem of evil. And for those who are not familiar with the problem of evil, it's just basically atheists saying, if there is a God, why does evil exist? Why are kids starving? Why are people getting kidnapped? Why are women raped? Why does war happen? How can God exist in a world where there are problems, where there is evil? And I think that this is thoroughly addressed in the Bible. But let's go ahead and get in on it today.
So what we want to do first is, I thought it would be a good idea to cover basic questions, because I get a lot of messages and emails, tweeters, and other such things that deal with simple questions. And I focus a lot on the really abstract stuff, but what about the really kind of basic issues, basic apologetic questions? And you wanted to give me some of those, so I will do my best.
So a lot of people have trouble reconciling God's activities in the Old Testament versus Jesus in the New Testament. So one of the questions was, if God is just, then why does he sometimes condone others to commit heinous acts like owning slaves or selling your children or committing genocide or things like forcing a rape victim to marry their perpetrator?
Right, so the ancient world was really brutal. And in fact, what's interesting about the Mosaic Law is that it was one of the most temperate and first pioneering aspects of human rights in history. So Mosaic Law wasn't brutal by comparison. In fact, it was a tremendous advancement for human rights, because humans are made in the image of God. So most of those laws that deal with the attaining of slaves and so forth actually tempered the ancient Middle Eastern laws about slavery. So yes, it was true that slavery was an aspect of the ancient world, as was polygamy, other things like that. And what those laws did was to make it fair and to give people a hand up when typically, when it came to pagan empires and pagan emperors, they didn't have any rights at all. So actually, this is the first introduction of rights for people who were slaves. You have to understand, slaves in the ancient world were not viewed as humans. They were viewed as property, like cattle. So while it's true that it seems harsh to us to think of the fact that if a woman had her virginity taken or something like that, actually when you read the text in Deuteronomy, what it says is that her father and her family gets the dowry. They actually get the money that was owed to her when she was going to be married. And so it's kind of like the old Southern idea of the shotgun marriage, of like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Like if you knocked up Sister Susie, not your, don't knock your sister. If you knocked up the Hatfield daughter and you were McCoy, there would be a shotgun wedding where you were expected to step up to your duties. And what's interesting is that in that text in the Mosaic Law, it doesn't allow the man to divorce her. So in other words, it doesn't allow him to shame her because it wasn't her fault. So actually, she's getting the best side of this deal here. And if it's proven in the law, the way the law functioned with 2 and 3 witnesses.
Emergency message. You guys, I am declaring this a positivity space. And people who are negative, dude, people who are mean to people just get banned. All right? Usually people are mean to me. If you're mean to me, you get banned, dude. If you're mean to anybody else, you get banned. Everybody who's negative gets banned.
If it was proven, then he had to pay the dowry. He had to marry her. He had to own up to it. And he couldn't willy-nilly divorce her because he had taken her virginity, and he had to pay for it. So actually this was a positive law, and if we understand that this was a society where marital relationships were viewed like property relationships, children and women were viewed like property, this was actually giving them more rights. So that's the first thing I would say about that. And secondly, I would say that the God of the Old Testament is not a mean God versus the New Testament nice God. In Orthodox theology, we actually would say that it's Jesus who gave those laws. James says that Jesus, it was the same God, the Old Testament, that was present at Mount Sinai. Jesus says, I am, right before Abraham was, I am. So he's saying that I am the God that spoke to Moses and that spoke to Abraham. And that's why Paul can say in Romans 4, and why Hebrews can say the gospel was preached to the Old Testament patriarchs. They believe in the same Jesus we do. They're saved in the exact same way we are. So Maximus Confessor says that they partook of theosis just like we do. And in fact, that's why Moses, who saw the face of God, is the model for us for how we see the face of Christ in the New Testament. Paul says that in 2 Corinthians 3 and 4. So there's not a difference of salvation between the Old and the New Testament. It's the same Jesus that saves us. And in fact, many of those Mosaic laws, which do seem harsh to us, we have to put it in the context of the ancient world. If we think about the conquest of Canaan, the Canaanites were exceptionally degenerate. They were in fact practicing bestiality. This is discussed in Leviticus. They were intending to further the rights that had caused, in many cases, many theologians' ideas, the flood. So the flood was brought about because of this really degenerate mixing and aberration that dealt with bestiality and that dealt with things discussed in Genesis 6. And that's why they had to be wiped out, is that it's basically starting the whole clean blank slate over in terms of creation. So that was actually a good thing. And what's really interesting is if you read Exodus and we realize that the Logos is the angel of the Lord, Jesus is the angel of the Lord, it's the same angel of the Lord that appears to Moses that in Exodus later says God put his name in that angel that's in Jesus. It also says that Jesus is the angel of the Lord that cleansed the promised land. So Jesus is the one that cleansed the promised land, and that's because Jesus has the authority and the right to decide when we live and when we die, because he is God. He is the Son of God. So the first thing I would say to the person who says this, after all that, is you have to understand that we are not in possession of our own lives and in possession of truth and falsehood, in right and wrong. We have to submit to what God says, because God is the ultimate authority in our worldview. And so God being God, he has the right to decide when we live and when we die. It's not our right to decide that, unless there are cases where God has, for example, appointed civil rulers who do have the right and the authority to make decisions about life and death. So in the big scheme, in the big scale, God ultimately decides when we live and when we die, and even death can be a positive can be a positive thing. Death is not always a negative thing. It can be a positive thing. So sometimes death is good.
What would you say about all the harsh punishments in the Old Testament, such as the death penalty for rebellion or other lesser crimes that we wouldn't think would deserve a death penalty?
Well, we have to keep in mind that our perspective is not the same as God's perspective. So in God's mind, he says, for example, to Saul, when Saul goes to the witch of Endor, when Saul fails to live up to his duties as king, Samuel tells Saul that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And the reason that God sees those sins as worthy of death is because attempts to defy legitimate authority, right? And this is a little more philosophic. There is questions of when authority is and isn't legitimate. But when there is rebellion against legitimate authority, this is seen as an affront to God himself. So because God has established hierarchy in the earth, right? So the family has the father as the head of the household, the nation has the king as the head of the nation. Defying those people are essentially in Scripture defying God's anointed, whether it's the father, whether it's the priest, or whether it's the king. Those are God's anointed, the prophet/priest role. So when you defy them for no good reason, to be rebellious, it's a defiance against God himself. It's striking God in the face. And so actually what the penalty says is that he who would strike father or mother should be put to death. And that's because, you don't have the authority or the right to strike your parents. They have authority over you. And so to strike them is a violation of the Ten Commandments. It's a violation of, it's essentially striking God himself. Because when God gives the death penalty to Noah, he gives it because he says, because man is made in the image of God. So killing a human being is an attempt to kill the image of God in man. That's why it's so heinous, you could say, of an act. And the reason that God establishes the death penalty with Noah is because once you've done that, you've made an offense and affront against God himself, who is the author of life. And so you're, at that point, anti-life. You've established yourself as a kind of virus in the world. And so that's why you have to be put to death, is because you're no longer living in synergy with life. You're anti-life. And so that's why it merits the death penalty. And what's interesting is that the New Testament, Jesus, they don't go against that. They actually continue the death penalty into the New Testament period. Paul says very clearly in Romans 13, 1-7, that the state is a diakonos, a minister of God.
I'm thinking of that story about when the children were making fun of the prophet
Elijah,
and calling him bald, and then the bear came and mauled all them. Does that seem...
Well, if I recall, the word is teenagers, so they weren't little kids, but they were attacking God's anointed, correct? They were mocking him and so forth. And from God's vantage point, you don't mock God's prophets. That's mocking God himself. God will not be mocked. And so Elijah calls forth the bear. It's a curse, and she mauls them, correct? And that is a fitting retribution, because it's not just making fun of somebody, it's going against, again, God's anointed. That's why God says, touch not mine anointed, speaking of the king or speaking of the office of the prophet or the priest or whoever. And the same would go for your parents. If you remember, there's a pretty stiff penalty when in the case of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, when Ham looks upon Noah's drunkenness, right? Noah was drunk and he was laying exposed, and Ham mocks him or looks upon him, so we don't exactly know what he did, but he did something that was rude and offensive to his father, and God pronounced a chastisement upon all of his descendants for that action. So that's how we have to understand that God doesn't always see things in the way we see things.
If God is just and all-knowing, then where does evil come from?
So this is the problem of evil question, and basically you're asking, how would we reconcile the fact that if God is omnibenevolent, all-loving, all-knowing, and yet at the same time all-powerful, how does he permit evil and hold people accountable and not stop the evil? Well, this is a typical objection from atheists and agnostics and so forth. And the first thing I would say is that the most helpful response to this is to reorient the way that we think about good and evil. So the first thing I would say is that if there's no God, if we don't have belief in God, then there's not actually a criteria for right and wrong at all. If there's not a criteria for right and wrong at all, then there's not a basis to critique God himself. Now, within the Christian worldview, there's no problem, intellectual or moral or theological, in saying that God has a morally sufficient reason for why he permits evil, and he's not bound to explain to or to tell us why that is in all cases. For one, we're finite, so we couldn't even understand that in all cases, right? This is kind of the point of the book of Job, is that if you read through the book of Job by about chapters 32 to 38, it's actually Elihu, one of the younger guys, who kind of confronts and critiques Job and says, actually, Job, if you admit your humility before God, then you're not in a position to call into question what God does or doesn't allow. If God exists, then you just have to trust him, and you don't have a basis to criticize him, because God himself is the standard by which we know things are good or evil, right or wrong. So if that's the case, then we can't call into question his judgments, because being infinite and us being finite, it's not even possible for us to know all of the different reasons and justifications or bases as to why he lets certain things happen or not happen. So I would say that, first of all, to even be able to critique something as right or wrong, as fair or unfair, it requires the Christian God. It requires God's existence itself to begin with, so that we have a standard that's consistent within a worldview or paradigm. And if God doesn't exist, then there's absolutely no basis to criticize or call anything objectively wrong or right. They just are. Events just are. They're not right or wrong. It's just subjective tastes and preference. So you may not like a thing that happened. You may not like that somebody stole your watch. You may not like that Bill Cosby grabbed your booty. But it doesn't matter, because there's not objective right or wrong if there's no God. There's just preferences and tastes. And preferences and tastes don't translate into anything being, quote, right or wrong. Right? It's just subjective. So we need theism and the metaphysics of theism and the ethics of theism to be able to say things are right or wrong. And again, the answer to the question is that God is not bound to give to us all of the reasons why he permits all these different things to occur, because it's entirely theologically fine in our worldview to say that he has a morally sufficient reason why he permits it, and he's not bound to tell us. And as we see from the book of Job, we probably couldn't even grasp if he did tell us.
So why would God punish Adam and Eve for sinning if they didn't even know what it was before they had done it?
Well, talking about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is very distinct in Orthodox theology. It doesn't mean that Adam and Eve didn't know right and wrong. In fact, they were accountable because they did know the good. So that's the first thing I would say, is that Adam and Eve were in communion with God, so they knew the good. And that's precisely why they are accountable, is because they begin to doubt and they believe the word of the serpent over the word of God. And what's most interesting about that passage is that you'll see what Adam and Eve do reflected in all unbelieving thought and in all actions of sin that we all commit. And that's where we actually believe and act like we are our own gods. We decide, because if you remember, that's what Satan says. Satan says, you shall be like gods. And that's what God doesn't want you. He doesn't want you to eat of that, because he doesn't want you to be like him. And so Satan gets us to doubt and think that God is attempting to hold us down, when in fact, in Orthodox theology, if man had persevered in virtue in the garden, he would have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil too. Because there's nothing that's inherently evil in itself. But man needed to be confirmed in virtue before he did that. And so he wasn't confirmed in virtue yet, but he jumped and leaped ahead into what he wasn't ready to do yet. And that's what led to his demise. So in the same way, we would say that every time we sin, or every time human beings or unbelievers critique Christianity, they echo this error of Satan and of Adam in the garden, where they say, I will decide for myself, I will be like God, I will determine good and evil, I will be a law unto myself. And that's what autonomy, that's what sin is.
So you're saying they would have been allowed to eat of that fruit eventually.
Mm-hmm. But they needed to be confirmed in virtue first, and they weren't.
Let's talk about the question of evil. Where does it come from?
That's a good question. Evil in Scripture is spoken of in different ways. So sometimes evil is spoken of as a privation. And in philosophy, what that means is essentially a lack of something. So for example, if I lack eyesight, then I'm in a state of privation of eyesight. Blindness is a lack of. So in one sense, Scripture talks about evils coming upon people which are states of privation, right? So I lack a leg, I got a peg leg, I'm a pirate, I'm lacking my full mobile capacity. That's a privation. In other senses, evil is spoken of as a moral movement of the will. And this is really the only definition that we have of evil in our theology, which is as a moral privation, you could say. So it's a move of the will away from the good. It doesn't have any positive ontological or metaphysical existence in itself. This is why we would differ from religions like Zoroastrianism or religions that are dualistic or Gnostic, which would actually give evil a substantial metaphysical being or existence. We don't think it has any metaphysical being or existence in itself, because God said everything that exists is good. In Genesis, he created everything good. So evil has no self-subsistent being, no ontological status in itself. It's only a privation, and more specifically, it's only a movement of the will away from the good.
Is it true that good and evil cannot exist without each other?
That's a good question. So like we were just talking about, a lot of people assume that they're kind of co-relatives, that they're flip sides of the same coin, that you can't have good without evil and you can't have evil without good. And that's completely different to what I was outlining earlier. That's part of the reason that we say evil doesn't have any ontological being or subsistence of its own, is that we want to avoid these kind of dialectics and these dualistic systems. In Orthodoxy, Christianity is not a dualistic system, even though a lot of people think incorrectly that it is. So basically, we would say that God's existence is goodness itself, right? God has goodness as one of his energies. And so when he creates out of his goodness. And everything that exists, therefore, has existence and is, in a sense, a participation in God's goodness. So therefore, evil is a movement away from goodness and a movement away, in a sense, from existence. And that's why we say that moral evil is a movement of the will away from the good, and it's therefore not true that evil requires good and good requires evil, because evil doesn't have any being, it doesn't have any existence of its own. And that's why when in the eschaton there's no more evil in the end, when we're resurrected, there will still be good and multiple goods to choose from. We'll still have free will because we have multiple goods to choose from, and it's no longer a choice between good and evil. So free will is not ultimately defined by good and evil as a choice. It's ultimately defined in Eden and in the eschaton by choices between different multiple goods. So it's only defined as a choice between good and evil during this stage after the fall. But in the resurrection, it won't be that way. And that's another way that we show, another way to prove that evil has no existence of its own.
Is that another aspect that is unique to Christianity?
I would say so. I'd say Masonry and Luciferianism and Gnosticism and Hinduism, most of those religious schemes, most of those religious worldviews and systems either fall into monism, where everything is blended into one, or dualism, where you have kind of two competing principles, or some other version of sort of many principles, or polytheism or chaos. Those are all the different possible systems that you could have, and you're limited actually in the number of systems that you can have, and that's why Christianity is unique.
Oh boy, that noise that was going, I don't know if that was a typewriter or what. That noise was really annoying. Jay, please do more of these kinds of studies. Yeah, problem of evil. Well, I always just say that the purpose of this life isn't to be in eternal bliss. We're here to learn things. It requires a struggle. We're learning through a struggle, through overcoming obstacles. And there's got to be flaws. There's got to be evil. We're here to experience. Ultimately, the Bible is saying that we have sin. We have this sin inside of us. We are not able to not sin. We are all flawed. So this life isn't really just a great big reward for everybody all the time. There is a creator, in spite of the fact that our experience isn't always wonderful, ooey gooey goodness all the time. So let's go ahead and wrap it up with this video. Pacing felt a little bit off today, just a couple of stumbles, a little internet issue, but we're getting it every day this week, you guys, 5 days a week. We're going to really get into the rhythm with it. I think one thing I'm going to start doing is looking at trends. I'm going to get some good sources for trends so I can get good topics going every single day. We're going to get into good momentum here, guys. Let's be good to each other.
So for 2,000 years, Christianity has faced the same recurring problem again and again. It's known as the problem of evil. Let me just start here by saying this. Every worldview has something that it explains very well and something else that it has a difficult time explaining. And that's no different from the Christian worldview. It seems to me that the Christian worldview explains so very, very much about our world and about our life. It explains things like why sugar tastes sweet. It explains things like why we laugh at jokes and why we fall in love.
but it also explains things like why we suffer, why we struggle sometimes, why we find ourselves in tension with people. This is called the problem of evil. But for many people, the problem of evil is something that seems to be a discontinuity with the faith. In other words, they find evil to be something that they simply would not expect if Christianity were true. Historically speaking, the problem of evil has taken various forms. You have what's called a logical problem of evil, for example. This was very, very popular back in the 50s and the 60s. In fact, the whole first half of the 20th century, philosophers would argue that Christianity as a belief set entailed certain contradictions, that we believe this and we believe this, and those two are mutually exclusive, they're contradictory, and so therefore, Christianity is not just probably wrong, it is absolutely wrong, and you could say that with certainty. Christian philosophers have done a lot of work to respond to those problems, and generally speaking today, the consensus amongst philosophers, not just Christian philosophers, but even secular philosophers, is that the logical problem of evil is really not a problem. There's another version of the problem called the evidential problem, and simply put, we could put it this way. The evidential problem would say that in all likelihood, God doesn't exist, and they would base that off of the evidence we find in evil. The argument would go something like this. We don't have good evidence for the existence of God, but we do have good evidence against the existence of God, namely evil. And so therefore, when you weigh the evidence, hence the evidential argument, the evidence points against God. And so in all likelihood, God does not exist. Christian philosophers have done a lot of work on this problem of evil too in the last few decades, and you have a myriad of responses to this that we could consider and go into detail, but that's probably beyond the scope of this particular little interview. Suffice it to say for now that we've done good work there, showing how those types of arguments ultimately are not successful in defeating Christianity. I would point to a third problem, and I would suggest that this problem is actually the problem of evil that underlies all of the other versions that I've already talked about. I'd call this the existential problem, or maybe the religious problem. Let me explain what that is. By existential, I'm referring to things that happen in our life, things that matter to us in our experiences. So, for example, we fall in love. We laugh at jokes. We develop relationships. Those things matter to us very deeply. We lose a loved one. We lose a job. We lose a spouse to divorce or something like that. And that hits us and it hurts us very deeply. So when we talk about existential things, we're talking about things that hit us at the core of our being. The existential problem of evil is simply this. I say this to people, that ultimately the problem of evil is not a problem because you've got a bunch of philosophers or eggheads somewhere in an ivory tower debating the intellectual merits of Christian theism. Evil is a problem because it jumps up off the street and it punches us in the gut. It brings us to our knees, and in those moments, we have a difficult time hanging on to God. That's, I think, the real problem of evil. And it's a problem felt not just by non-believers, but if we're honest with each other, it's even felt by believers in the church when we struggle in these moments, praying for a young child to be healed, and we watch that young child die. Praying for that woman to be cured from breast cancer, and we watch that person die. Praying that things will work out in this marriage, and it doesn't work out. Those are the problems that cause us to sort of detach from belief in God. Now, how do we respond to that? That's a very complex problem, and in the history of the church, there's been a lot of different answers. I think the best way to do this is to understand where it comes from. We live in a broken, fallen world because we all collectively have turned away from God. And when we do that, we turn away from God, we turn away from life. And when we turn away from life, we turn into death. And so we understand now we live in a broken, fallen world because of our choices. And the Bible actually predicted that this would happen. At the end of Genesis 3, the Bible says this about Adam and the difficulty of working the ground. He says, "And thus it shall be until you return to the ground," which means that if we're reading our Bibles correctly, not only do we have place and space to say these things about evil, but ultimately the Bible's been predicting it the whole time. But the Bible predicts something else as well, and that is one who would come into this world in the form of a baby. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. He'd come into the world in the form of the baby. He would crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent would bruise his heel. This is a prophecy of a child to be born to us that will redeem and restore and make all things new. And the rest of the Bible is pointing to that same man. And in the Gospels, we find that man, Jesus Christ. The world is not as it's supposed to be, but it will be redeemed and it will be restored. And the Christian has to hang on to that hope.
All right, guys. Well, it wasn't perfect, but that was a podcast. And, for me right now, my life is all about momentum. Something that I very clearly began to understand under these last couple of months is just working out, drumming, reading every day. I got to do it every day, guys. I jump roped for 6 minutes today. I got a little bit of a back calisthenics workout in. I'm rough. My shape has slipped a little bit. I got to stick to it, man. That's just how it works for me. You guys should learn how it works for you. What helps you feel better? What makes you feel more mentally stable? I got to stay off the cigarettes because when I smoke, I don't work out. So these are just things I've been learning over these last couple of months, man. No more cigarettes. I'm done. I got to stop. I got to disconnect from what the people in the TV are doing because it's always those frickers in the TV, dude. They make cigarettes look cool. No cigarettes for me. We're going to keep the podcasts rocking 5 days a week. As far as the chill streams go, we'll see what's going on the weekends. But for me, guys, it's just momentum, productivity, staying with it, routine, momentum. That's how I work. That's how my body works. I start to feel shitty and unorganized when I'm not doing the things that I need to do all the time. I'm just smoking weed, man. And you know what? If I need to smoke a little bit more weed than I was, then that's fine. I might smoke a tiny bit more weed than I was smoking. That's just a cope that works for me. I have not even been smoking that much. I've just been flirting with cigarettes these last couple of months, and it's just time to drop it. So there's no need for me to smoke a vape. There's no need for anything. I had been off cigarettes, and then I decided to start trying them again, and it's just time to end it. It's time to get back to what I know I need. So God bless you guys. Back tomorrow with the podcast. I'm going to really start trying to get into the routine here. The show's not super complex. I wouldn't expect too much. Just an opportunity for us to hang out, for me to take advantage of the sources that I'm allowed to use on live stream. Make sure we don't get those copyright strikes. Just watching some news together, covering a religious topic. I think for the religious video, it drags on a little bit once it goes much past 10 minutes. It's a good opportunity to get a couple of 10-minute videos in, get my little commentary going here and there. And it's content, baby. If you don't have time to watch it live, you can watch it after the fact.